Let's start with my favorite muscle, probably your favorite as well. Glutes. We have gluteus maximus, gluteus medius and gluteus minimus. They all originate at the back side of the ilium and insert into the femur, except that the gluteus maximus shares another tendon with tensor fascia latae and inserts all the way down into the top of the femur. The main function of the gluteus maximus is to extend the hip, although it's also involved in the hip external rotation and hip abduction. Gluteus medius and gluteus minimus are mainly involved in hip abduction and internal rotation. That's why if you wanted to maximize glute development, I would make sure that you have some squats, lunges or hip thrust movements to work that glute through the hip extension, but also some hip abduction to get that full round appearance of the entire gluteal musculature and not neglect gluteus medius and minimus. Now we can move on to the thigh muscles, and we can split it into three groups: quadriceps, hamstrings and adductors. But before we do that, I have to mention the sartorius, which is the longest muscle in the human body. It originates at the front of the pelvis and inserts into the top of the tibia. It's involved in hip flexion, external rotation and abduction. So basically, if you're doing leg raises or hip abductions, you will ensure that this muscle is sufficiently developed. Okay, let's talk about the quadriceps. There are 4 quadriceps muscles and they all insert into the common patellar tendon. 3 of them originate at the femur. Those are vastus lateralis, vastus intermedius and vastus medialis. On top of the vastus intermedius is the rectus femoris, and it's the only one that crosses the hip joint. So all of them function as the knee extensors, but because rectus femoris crosses the hip joint, it's also involved in the hip flexion. This is why when you lean backwards on the leg extension machine, you will feel your rectus femoris stretching out, and this was actually shown to enhance its growth when you're training it that way. Anyways, all 4 quadriceps muscles work as the knee extensors, so any exercise that involves knee extension is going to target your quads. On the back side of the thigh we have 3 hamstring muscles: semitendinosus, semimembranosus and biceps femoris. They all cross both knee and hip joints, which means that they are involved both in knee flexion and hip extension. Now keep in mind that biceps femoris has 2 heads, and one of them does not cross the hip joint, but it attaches into the femur. This means that in order to train this head, you will need to do some sort of knee flexion movement, like leg curls for example. So in order to maximize your hamstring development, you will need to include both knee flexion and hip extensions. For the hip extensions, best exercises are going to be Romanian deadlifts or good mornings. And for knee flexions, you can do any type of leg curls or glute ham raises. Then we have the adductors. They are composed out of 5 muscles that are positioned between your thighs. They all originate at the pelvis and insert into the femur, all except the gracialis. This one inserts into the tibia, which is why it contributes to the knee flexion as well. So as you may have guessed, the main function of the adductor muscles is to perform hip adduction. They're gonna be involved in most of the squatting exercises, especially if you're using a wider stance, but the best way to ensure their maximum development is to do some hip adductions on the machine as well.